Every afternoon on their way home from school, the children used to go to play in the Giant's garden. It was a large, lovely garden with soft green grass. Here and there over the grass stood beautiful flowers like stars. And there were 12 peach trees that in the springtime burst into delicate blossoms of pink and white, and in the autumn bore rich fruit. And the birds in the trees sang so sweetly that the children used to stop playing just to listen to them. One day the giant decided to return to his castle. He had been away for several years. When he arrived, he saw the children playing in the garden.
What are you doing here? My garden is my own garden. Anyone can understand that. And I will allow nobody to play in it but myself.
So he built a high wall all round it and put up a large sign.
No children allowed.
He was a very selfish giant. The poor children now had no place to play. They tried to play on the road, but the road was very dusty and full of hard stones, and they didn't like it. And they used to wander around the high wall when their lessons were over and talk about the beautiful garden inside. And then the spring came, and all over the country there were little blossoms and little birds. But in the garden of the selfish giant, it was still winter. The birds didn't care to sing in it, for there were no children, and the trees refused to blossom. Once a beautiful flower put its head up from the grass. But when it saw the large sign saying,
No children allowed,
it felt so sorry for the children that it popped back into the ground again and went off to sleep. The only people who were pleased were the snow and the frost.
Spring will not come to this garden, so we will live here all the year round.
The snow covered up the grass with her great white cloak, and the frost painted all the trees silver. And then they invited the north wind to stay with them, and he came. He was wrapped in furs, and he roared all day about the garden.
Oh, this is a delightful spot. We must ask the hail on a visit.
And so the hail came, and every day for 3 hours he rattled on the roof of the castle, and then he ran round and round the garden as fast as he could go. He was dressed in gray, and his breath was like ice. And the giant sat looking out his window at his cold, white garden.
I cannot understand why the spring is so late in coming. I hope there will be a change in the weather.
But the spring never came, nor the summer. The autumn gave golden fruit to every garden, but to the giant's garden she gave none. So it was always winter there, and the north wind and the hail and the frost and the snow danced about through the trees. One morning the giant was lying in bed when he heard some lovely music. It sounded so sweet to his ears that he thought it must be the king's musicians passing by. But it was really only a little bird singing outside his window. But it was so long since he had heard a bird sing in his garden that it seemed to him to be the most beautiful music in the world. And suddenly, the hail stopped dancing over his head, the wind ceased roaring, and a delicious perfume came to him through the open window.
I believe the spring has come at last.
He jumped out of bed and looked out. What did he see? A most wonderful sight. Through a little hole in the wall, the children had crept in, and they were sitting in the branches of the trees. And in every tree that he could see, there was a little child. And the trees were so glad to have the children back again that they had covered themselves with blossoms and were waving their arms gently above the children's heads. And the birds were flying about and twittering with delight, and the flowers were looking up through the green grass and laughing. It was a lovely scene. only in one corner it was still winter. It was the farthest corner of the garden, and in it was standing a little boy. He was so small that he couldn't reach up to the branches of the tree, and he was wandering all around it, crying bitterly. The poor tree was still quite covered with frost and snow, and the north wind was blowing and roaring above it.
Climb up, little boy,
said the tree, and it bent its branches down as low as it could. But the boy was too tiny, and the giant's heart melted as he looked out.
How selfish I have been. Now I know why the spring would not come here. I will put that poor little boy on the top of the tree, and then I will knock down the wall, and my garden shall be the children's playground forever and ever.
So he crept downstairs and opened the front door quite softly and went out into the garden. But when the children saw him, they were so frightened that they all ran away, and the garden became winter again. Only the little boy did not run, for his eyes were so full of tears that he didn't see the giant coming. And the giant stole up behind him and took him gently in his hand and put him up into the tree. And the tree burst once again into blossom, and the birds came and sang on it, and the little boy stretched out his two arms and flung them round the giant's neck and kissed him. And the other children, when they saw that the giant wasn't wicked any longer, came running back, and with them came the spring.
It is your garden now, little children.
And then he took a great axe and knocked down the wall and threw away the sign. And when the people were going to market, they found the giant playing with the children in the most beautiful garden they had ever seen. And spring remained in his garden forevermore, and he was never called the selfish giant again.